Soon after arriving early on the morning of July 11, 2001, to investigate a triple murder at the Gonzales family's house in Sydney's neighbourhood of North Ryde, police were suspicious of the only surviving family member, Sef Gonzales, a 21-year-old student. So in today's video we are going to tell you the detail of this horrific crime and how the killer of this family was brought to justice. But before continuing, if you like strange and mysterious stories, then please consider subscribing our channel and also press the bell icon to get the regular updates. The Gonzales family consisted Sef, his father Teddy, his mother Mary Loiva, and his 18-year-old sister Clodine, had relocated to Australia 10 years prior and prospered through their family-run immigration law practice. Sef Gonzales, who had a baby face, was now hunched in the garage, sobbing violently but with no tears streaming down his face. After a while, he seemed more concerned about cops discovering a pornographic film in his bedroom than he was about his family, who lay severely beaten with a baseball bat and stabbed to death somewhere between 3 and 6 p.m. the previous afternoon. When Sef Gonzales returned home at 11:45 p.m. that night, he discovered one or two males in the house, which he chased down the street on foot. He'd arrived home to discover his family slain and the house covered in blood. He'd cradled his father in his arms before frantically trying to stop the flow of blood spilling from a massive wound in his sister's side, which was impossible given that she'd been dead for hours. Gonzales, on the other hand, had very little blood on his hands or clothes. And he couldn't explain why the anti-Asian slur "fuck off Asians" KKK was sprayed in blue paint on the lounge room wall, except to speculate that it was related to a road rage incident the night before, when three men racially abused his family over a traffic incident and followed them home before driving away. Police and family members looked on in surprise as Gonzales stood behind the three caskets, calm and sad-faced, and sang a solo performance of the Mariah Carey "One Sweet Day," as if he were auditioning for Australian Idol. "It's difficult to convey the affection and relationships in my family," Gonzales said in a public statement after the funeral, appealing for help in finding the perpetrator. "But if you imagine the four corners of the globe, we were the four in my world. All three corners of my world have vanished." Relatives began to distance themselves from Sef Gonzales after learning that all was not as it looked and that they would be in danger as long as he remained on the loose. Gonzales was with his father's accountant 3 days after the deaths, determining the exact amount of the bequest. Gonzales forged death certificates on his computer to expedite the probate process. Gonzales told his buddies he was getting rich and he test drove a Porsche and a Lexus. He sold some of his mother's jewelry and his parents' cars, hired a luxury apartment, and was spotted dancing, drinking, and having a great time in all of the local nightclubs. Meanwhile, detectives were working around the clock to apprehend the Gonzales family's assailant. Sef was the only possible suspect. Gonzales set in motion a plan to purchase seeds of potentially deadly plants over the internet in February of that year, reportedly to mix with his family's food, according to emails he thought were wiped from his computer. To hide his tracks, he wrote a typed letter to a big food business, claiming that 3 of their most popular goods had been poisoned and were on the shelves of an unknown supermarket. He also wrote similar letters to the Australian Quarantine and Inspection Service, and the federal police. His fingerprint was detected on one of the envelopes, and traces of these letters were recovered on his computer. Sef's mother became dangerously ill in early July, little over a week before the killings, and was brought to the hospital with suspected food poisoning. Gonzales is also said to have had a mild case of food sickness, which he blamed on a restaurant where the family had dined the night before. Gonzales allegedly put the poisoning scheme on hold once his mother recovered and threw the incriminating seeds in the backyard, where a toxic plant was discovered 3 years later. When asked why he bought the poison seeds, Gonzales told authorities he wanted to kill himself after learning he had cancer and losing the partner he adored at the same time. Police told Gonzales through a friend in December 2001 that they didn't trust his alibi, that he was away from the family home at the time of the murders since 2 other persons had seen his car there at the time. Gonzales said about fabricating a fresh alibi, claiming he was at a brothel at the time of the murders while investigators listened in on a tapped phone. The problem was that the prostitute he was meant to be with at the time was on vacation. He then paid a taxi driver $50 to sign a dictated statement, claiming he drove Gonzales to Chatswood on the day in issue. Gonzales also provided police a fabricated email apparently sent to him by a wealthy Filipino businessman, claiming responsibility for his family's deaths and instructing police to check his father's business records for the truth. Gonzales, on the other hand, had no explanation for the remnants of blue paint found on the sleeve of the jumper he was wearing on the night of the killings, which were identical to the blue paint used to write the racist message on the wall. In the end, it was discovered that Sef Gonzales lived the life of Walter Mitty, and nothing he told his friends or the police was even close to the reality. He didn't have cancer, he wasn't a black belt in taekwondo, he wasn't offered a recording contract for his rendition of One Sweet Day, which he'd performed at the funeral. He wasn't such a stud that prostitutes didn't charge him, he didn't own a television production company, and he wasn't training for the Olympics. In truth, he was a law student who was afraid of failing university and humiliating his family. Owing to poor marks. He felt he'd found a solution to solve all of his problems while also living the opulent lifestyle he desired by murdering them all. Despite continuing to maintain his innocence at his trial in May 2004, a jury found Sef Gonzales guilty on all counts after only 4 hours of deliberation. He was sentenced to 3 terms of life imprisonment without the chance of release. L.J. Hooker, a North Ryde real estate agent, was fined more than $20,000 in December 2004 after being ordered to refund a $80,000 deposit to an unwitting buyer after selling the Gonzales house as a dead estate and neglecting to inform the buyers of the true tragic circumstances.